Right now is the perfect time to be trading in fantasy football because the bye weeks are coming up and now is the time to improve your team. In this video, we're going to talk about 7 wide receivers you should be looking to trade for, not now, but right now. And for what it's worth, I've helped over 20,000 people win their fantasy leagues just the last few years combined, and I plan to do the same for you in this video. And we're going to start with maybe somewhat of an obvious one, but a lot of people are panicking, at least obvious to me, and it's Brandon Aiyuk as a buy low. And look, I get it. It's been a frustrating season for this guy. If we look at his stats so far this year, through 3 games, just 11 catches. Normally we're used to that being closer to 20. Just 119 yards. That's something he would normally put up in 1 game, and now it's taking him 3 games to get there. Sal, what is going on with Brandon Aiyuk? Well, we'll get into that, but I also want to let you know that the underlying usage is looking encouraging after what he just did in week 3. Because according to Fantasy Life right here, look at this column where it says targets. That's his target share. In week 1, he only earned 14% of the targets. Week 2, only 14% of the targets. These were some real concerns. But in week 3, he earned 33% of the targets, which is an elite number, which would lead the NFL if he did that all season long. So again, an elite number, but this is what it did. It only translated to 5 catches for 48 yards, a measly 48 yards. A guy you spent a second, maybe a third, maybe a 4th round pick on in your fantasy draft only got you 9.8 points as his best performance this year, 3 weeks into the season. And the most disappointing part was this was a matchup against the Rams, who have been giving it up 130 plus total yards to 3 separate receivers this year, including his own teammate Brandon Aiyuk in week 3 and Juwan Jennings. So I get your frustrations. There was no Deebo Samuel in that game. There was no George Kittle in that game. That was supposed to be the week in a great matchup where Brandon Aiyuk goes for his 80 to 100 plus yards, a touchdown or 2, and he pops off for 20 plus fantasy points for you. If it's not going to happen then when will it? Well, I personally believe that it happens this week as a 10-point favorite against the Patriots. And the Patriots secondary, I'm not concerned about it. I know Christian Gonzalez is a nice young player. He's played in 7 games in his NFL career, and in half of them, he hasn't looked all that great. I think Brandon Aiyuk can do just fine as somebody who moves around the formation completely and doesn't really have any concerns in terms of getting shut down, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself this. The guy who last year had 1,300 yards, over 1,300 yards on just 105 targets, the first wide receiver ever to top over 1,300 yards on just 100 targets, that guy who is insanely efficient and talented, and we've seen it now for multiple years, do we really think all of a sudden on just this 3-game sample to start the year, he's all of a sudden not good and bad now? This 3-game sample doesn't change the fact that he's a superstar receiver. That's why he was paid $30 million a year this offseason. And now, yes, the holdout likely had to do with being rusty. He wasn't with the team in training camp and preseason. That might be the reason why these first 3 games have looked bad. But on that note, I'm now seeing more and more people say, oh, that's why you shouldn't have held out. You should have attended practice. No, fuck that. No, that's not the case here. We're going to be pro player here. Your only leverage as a player these days is to actually hold out and not go to camp, to put some pressure on the organization, get some media attention on your side. So I'm not going to put that on Brandon Aiyuk's jacket that, oh, he should have went to camp. No, what he wanted to do, he set out and it ended up working. He got paid $30 million. So I don't care if he's rusty for a couple of weeks in fantasy football. The guy got a bag to support his entire lifestyle and his family for the rest of his life and their lives as well. So since George Kittle is expected to miss at least 1 more game and Deebo Samuel expected to miss at least 1 more game, Christian McCaffrey remains on IR, I'm thinking Brandon Aiyuk does break out this week against the Patriots, and he's somebody that I'm looking to buy right now in fantasy drafts. If you can sell a Stephon Diggs off a good game for him, do it. If you can package J.K. Dobbins with somebody else, do it. Now, the next guy I'm looking to buy, and I've already sent out like 4 or 5 trades, and I'm trying to work this in a couple of leagues right now, is T Higgins. He's my favorite buy low right now. He returned from a hamstring injury in week 3, and some people were worried like, okay, T Higgins off the hamstring, how limited is he going to be? How's he going to screw me on Monday Night Football? But he didn't. At least from a usage standpoint. His overall game log might have. We'll get into that. But in week 3, he ran 95% of the routes. He was out there for basically every single play, playing 90% of the snaps. Earned a pretty decent 16% target share for your first game back, especially in a game where Jamar Chase was dominating. But overall, this didn't lead to the best performance. Just 3 catches for 39 yards. I think, though, that this was a solid performance in terms of usage. 7 fantasy points isn't going to get it done. The guy who now has T Higgins in your league, well, the first 2 weeks you didn't get to use him because of a hamstring injury right before the season. Then in week 3, he waits till Monday Night Football, watches him live, and he doesn't do anything. That guy might be getting frustrated. But I'm here to say that Jamar Chase, every single week, we know he's a great player, but every single week he's not going to score 32 fantasy points. He's not going to have over 100 yards, as you can see right here, in multiple touchdowns in every single game. When T Higgins is seeing this elite usage in favorable matchups like we saw this past week, which he's going to have one as soon as this week, and we'll talk about that in a second, if that continues, you're going to get the big T Higgins game sooner rather than later. Because the good news was the Bengals offense actually got on track. Joe Burrow goes for 300 yards. He's completing over 75% of his passes. He ends up scoring 3 touchdowns. And yes, it was the ideal matchup against the Commanders. But isn't that where you want to see it happen? That's a jump start that an offense needs. And maybe sometimes times. That's all that you need, is to get going, and then from there, you're set. And I also think it helps your offense when you get a stud receiver like T Higgins back, because it takes attention away from Jamar Chase. It makes your wide receiver 2, Andre Yoshevich, who is struggling as a wide receiver 2, now become your wide receiver 3, and we saw him find success in week 3 as well, finding the end zone. So now it just makes the overall functioning of this offense better. It allows the run game to maybe find some more running lanes. We saw both Zach Moss and Chase Brown look good in week 3. The offense has come together for Cincinnati, and T Higgins is healthy. I'm interested. But the stock on Higgins overall and the sentiment around him is low, not only because of his injury to start this season, but even dating back to last year. Because we can look right here at his injuries from last year. I mean, dating back to 2022, he ends the season with a hamstring injury. Then week 4 of 2023, he has a rib fracture, so he starts that season with an injured Joe Burrow. Then T Higgins gets injured himself. He comes back in week 10 when Joe Burrow's about to get hurt. He has a hamstring injury, and he starts off this year with a hamstring injury. So now it's been back-to-back seasons with all these injuries. That's why last year he finishes the wide receiver 40, but this is not a true representation of the talent of T Higgins, who's normally, in my opinion, a borderline top 20 receiver. And according to RotoViz game tool, when T Higgins is starting and out there with Joe Burrow and the two of them are healthy for a started and completed game, Higgins averages 14 fantasy points per game, which is top 20 production. So right now in your league, if you could trade like an Xavier Worthy 1-for-1 for T Higgins, do that instantly. Even a Devin Singletary at this point. I know he plays on Thursday night, so we have to see what happens there. If you can get it done before then, do that. But if you want even more names that I could throw out there like the Worthy and the Singletary to see who you should be trading for, a guy like T Higgins or other players in this video or other players just in general, well, this is my trades tool right here, my rest of season rankings. I rank the top 150 players the rest of the season. The higher they are, the more of a priority they are, so you know exactly who to be targeting in trades. And you can get that tool as well as my waiver wire rankings and tiers, my projections and rankings for the weeks, my game-by-game matchup notes for every single player's matchup, and a whole lot more in my fantasy blueprint this season. And you can get that fantasy blueprint right here. There's a link down below in the description. How to get access, you just follow these 2 simple steps. You go through the steps, it'll take you like a minute or so, and then you'll have access to the fantasy blueprint where you can get all of those tools that I just mentioned with 20,000 others, the tools that I use in all my leagues, and I use those to smack around my league mates with. But here's the thing. This is completely risk-free when you sign up through one of my 2 partners, 100% risk-free. It's a one-time payment of $10, but if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund that one-time payment right to you. And now the partners that you can use, again, they're linked down below. We have Underdog, we have Better, there's steps to do it. The links will be down below. It's all pretty straightforward once you get over there. So right now there's a QR code popping up on the screen, or you can click the link in the description below to get access with 20,000 other people to your fantasy blueprint, not now, but right now to smack around your league mates with. Now the next guy I want to talk about is a rookie, and it's McConkey of the Chargers, who I think is a strong buy low after his week 3 usage. Overall, the performance wasn't good. 3 catches for 44 yards on 6 targets. Not terrible because of the 6 targets, but the fantasy points of 7.4 ain't gonna get it done for you. It was a tough matchup against the Steelers, but this is the whole reason why he's a buy low. Because if we come over here to Fantasy Life, in week 3, runs a season high 88% of the routes, and he sees 30% of the targets. This is now the second time this season. Back in week 1, he saw 28% of the targets. So on the year now, McConkey has a 27% target share, leading this Chargers team. Like, I know all the hype, at least in fantasy on the waiver wires and all that, has been around Quentin Johnson because he's scored a lot of touchdowns and he's had touchdown success to start the season. But if we're talking about who the favorite target of Justin Herbert has been, the guy who's been schemed the most production, he's consistently getting targets, that is McConkey. Now, of course, this is still a run-first offense. The Chargers don't want to throw the ball more than 30 times in most of the games this year if they're playing with a lead. So that is a concern, but that's the whole point. You're going to pay for that. You're not going to overpay. You're going to factor that in when you're trading for McConkey. But I do believe, at least in the short term, this team will be forced to throw a little bit more. You have a matchup against the Chiefs. I think they're going to have to throw more. A matchup against the Cardinals on the road. I think they're going to have to throw more. A matchup against the Saints. I think they're going to have to throw more in these matchups, at least more than 20 to 25 times per game like they've been doing, and probably closer to 30 to 35 times per game, which is where we can see those potential 10 target games for McConkey in big performances. Now, there are some concerns because in week 3, Justin Herbert seemed to have re-injured his high ankle sprain, and that's a big problem. Herbert ended up getting x-rays though, and the positive news was that these came back negative. So there's no structural damage to the bone being done. It is still just his high ankle sprain. And according to Deepak Chona, Sports MD Analysis on Twitter right here, a Harvard-trained surgeon, you can see that he believes leans slightly to playing in week 3 for Justin Herbert. He re-aggravated the ankle, but walking well post-game. 2 offensive tackles are trending to miss as well. So it's not a great overall situation for Herbert. He thinks that he's going to lean to play. He said week 3. He meant week 4 there. So he thinks he's going to lean to play in week 4. But even if he doesn't, because the team does have a bye coming up, and that Chargers bye, as you can see right here, what is the Chargers bye week? Googled, it was week 5. So there's a chance that they just say, you know what, let's hold you out week 4. You get the bye in week 5. You come back fully good to go in week 6. You get about almost a month to recover from this high ankle re-injury. And for a quarterback, that's about all you need. Honestly, you can come back in a week or 2. For the running back and wide receiver position, it'll take usually 4 to 6 weeks. Quarterback, you're not as mobile, not cutting as much on that ankle. Okay, so if we look at the schedule, maybe Herbert doesn't play against the Chargers, and then you get just one game without without Herbert, and it's probably not a great performance for McConkey. Probably have to put him on your bench. But after that, Herbert comes back against the Broncos. Fine matchup overall. McConkey would avoid Patrick Surtain. Matchup against the Cardinals, as good as it gets. Matchup against the Saints, quality matchup. I think this is a spot right now where even because of this Herbert injury, it's another reason why we could buy even lower on McConkey. The sentiment on him is probably not great. But if I pull up my rest of season rankings tool, earlier I showed you the one from last week. This is the one for this week. It's updated and was just sent out to those 20,000 people. You can get it as well. McConkey is my 83rd overall ranked player the rest of the year. So again, I'm not saying that this is like one of the best players in fantasy. No, he's 83rd. Right now you want to buy low on him, but I would trade, as you can see these guys below him. I'm completely fine trading in Najee Harris, who's seeing a big workload but not being efficient for him. Keon Coleman off of bad usage but found the end zone. I'm completely fine doing that. Even Brian Robinson, it's kind of a wash at that point. If we scroll down a little bit more, Zach Charbonnet, who's probably not going to be the starter when Kenneth Walker comes back in a couple weeks. Christian Kirk off a big game. Don't know how much that sustains, right? These are the types of guys you'd be getting a steal if you're trading them 1-for-1 for Ladd McConkey. Cortland Sutton off of a decent game. That's exactly why something like that rest of season rankings tool is very helpful. Even if it's not mine, just somebody's, make sure you're using a tool, a trade calculator. It will help you in these deals. Now, the next guy we got to talk about is Tyreek Hill. Yeah, buy Tyreek Hill. But oh, Sal, he might have to play with Tim Boyle or Tyler Huntley in week 3. And oh, Sal, didn't you see that this past week he only scored 7 fantasy points with backup quarterbacks Skylar Thompson and Tim Huntley? He only had 3 catches for 40 yards. He had 0 points until very late in the game. Sal, didn't you see all these things? Yeah, I did. That's exactly why Tyreek Hill is a buy low. He's still a top 10 player the rest of the season for me because, you know what? Tua Tagovailoa, as of right now, is going to come back in a few weeks. And let's just make things clear right now. Yeah, he struggled in a matchup against the Bills where Tua got hurt and the team got boat raced, and everybody is struggling against the Bills this year. And then, yeah, he struggled in a matchup against the Seahawks where his quarterback went down with injury again. So can we just get a game where the starting quarterback starts and finishes that game? The guy who was game planning all week to play actually gets to finish and not somebody cold off the bench like Tim Boyle this past week. And then can we kind of hold judgment on the situation for Tyreek? And as I mentioned earlier briefly, like, yeah, Miami, they put Tua on the IR, the injured reserve, meaning that he would miss 4 games. So he's now missed 1 game. He's scheduled to return in 3 weeks in week 8. And as you can see, SportsMD analysis on Twitter right here says Tua goes on IR. His 2022 concussion took 4 weeks. I suspect a similar timeline here. Again, concussions are something that you can't predict. I had a concussion that lasted nearly 15 months. It is brutal. It is terrible. Mine was a very rare situation, and assuming that that's not happening to Tua, he seems like he's going to play football. Everybody wants him to retire. He doesn't want to retire is what all the indications are that he's going to be back in week 8. Otherwise, I think the Dolphins would have already gone out and got another veteran quarterback. So yes, Tyreek Hill for me is still a top 10 player the rest of the season because his starting quarterback's coming back in week 8. And when Tua was active for the first game and a half, Tyreek was arguably the #1 overall player in fantasy football. Right now, I would much rather have Tyreek over Alvin Kamara, over Nico Collins, over Jahmyr Gibbs. And there's no way most of your league mates view that the same right now because of recency bias, and they're so focused on what just happened 2 days ago. But a lot can change in the NFL in literally just 1 week. I mean, look at the Carolina Panthers. They go from being one of the worst offenses all time to literally scoring 36 points and maybe Andy Dalton looking like the best quarterback in week 3, specifically in week 3, and things are looking a lot better now for them. So I'd be trying to trade everywhere I could right now to get Tyreek Hill because, like I said, Tyreek Hill is still a top 10 player overall for me the rest of the season. Okay, he's number 11, as you can see right here, so we'll caveat that. Borderline top 10. It's neck and neck. It's like a point difference with him and Jonathan Taylor. They're kind of 10A, 10B for me. But I'd rather have Tyreek, like I said earlier, over Gibbs, over Marvin Harrison for sure. You can keep scrolling down. Easily over Alvin Kamara, James Cook, these guys who are popping off recently. Give me Tyreek Hill instead. The recency bias, you can leave that at the door. But the next guy that you're going to want to trade for is Jameson Williams, who finally had his first down week of the season because things started really good for Jameson, right? Week 1 of the season, he goes for 130 total yards and a beneficial matchup against the Rams, gets you 27 fantasy points. Week 2 of the season, sees a team high 11 targets, goes out there, or actually I think Amon-Ra might have had more targets, but he gets 11 targets in this game. He ends up having 14.4 fantasy points. Again, he totals nearly 100 yards. He goes for over 90 total yards in this one, still getting some usage on the ground. And that was a little bit more of a difficult matchup against Tampa compared to week 1. But then week 3 came and it was kind of a wonky game script. We'll show you that in a second. And Jameson didn't have a good game. You can see right here in this game, Jared Goff only throws 23 times. The running backs combined for 41 rush attempts between David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. If you factor in, or 39 rush attempts, if you factor in their receptions, it was 42 total touches. And then you scroll down to the game that Jameson Williams had, just 1 catch for 9 yards. Not great overall. You can include his negative 7-yard rush, and the dude literally got you 2 yards in week 3. So that's pretty bad. Now it actually opens up a buy low opportunity, though, for Jameson. Look, it was an all-around weird game for Detroit in week 3, and they just kind of found the secret sauce. Their offensive line was dominating the Cardinals' defensive line, and they stuck with that in the run game. But still, through 3 games, Jameson Williams is seeing a 22% target share. If you told me that at the beginning of the season, I would say, yeah, I'm signing up for this. I would assume that Sam Laporta was having a bigger year, or Amon-Ra was having a bigger year, because I would think that Jameson was going to be somewhere around 13-14%, not 22%, which is great to see right now. And he's seeing plenty plenty of cheat code targets. The cheat code targets for a wide receiver are the red zone targets and the deep targets and deep usage downfield that leads to big plays for fantasy. And right now, Jameson Williams leads the NFL with 5 red zone targets, and he ranks 6th in the NFL in downfield usage. So the role here is still very strong, and you can expect moving forward that Jared Goff is going to throw more than 23 times in a game. And also, for what it's worth, Sam Laporta at times in this game, I think he was carted to the locker room. He ended up coming back in, but he was dealing with an ankle sprain. It is a low ankle sprain, so he's only day to day. He's not really in danger of missing a lot of time, but maybe there's a chance that he's limited. Maybe there's a chance he misses week 4, or he's somewhat limited, not his full self for the next 1 to 2 weeks dealing with this ankle sprain. Only helps Jameson's production even more. So Jameson Williams is a top 50 rest of season player for me still right now. Jameson Williams is somebody that I want to trade for before his week 4 matchup against the Seahawks. I would trade somebody like a George Pickens for him if you could. Jackson Smith-Njigba off the big week 2 if you still can. Puka Nacua, if he's in somebody's IR spot, I would definitely trade Puka Nacua to get Jackson or Jameson Williams right now. Scroll down even more. Ramondre, you probably lost the steam after a bad week 3. Amari Cooper, this is the perfect guy. Amari Cooper just had a big week 3. I would trade him right now for Jameson Williams. You might not feel the same, but I currently have Jameson Williams 15 spots higher in my rest of season rankings. That Lions offense is just so much better, head and shoulders above the Browns. Now, before we get into this next guy who a lot of people are extremely down on, and that's why I'm buying low on him, and I actually just did in one league, 67% of you are not subscribed to this channel. It takes 2 seconds to hit subscribe. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Sal. This is the gentleman's agreement, the handshake that we do. If you made it this far, you're finding the video helpful or entertaining, or hopefully both of those things. And all I ask for in exchange is to hit the subscribe button, whether you're on your TV, tablet, phone, computer, whatever it might be. It just takes 2 seconds to do that, and it goes a long way. It lets more people see this channel, which lets me put out even more content. So gentleman's agreement, shake on it, hit subscribe. And that guy I want to talk about is Mark Andrews. And I just heard the big gasp in the crowd. Oh my God, Mark Andrews, left tackle. This guy's a tackle. He's not even a tight end anymore. Okay, I get it. Look, I get that week 3 was horrible for Mark Andrews, but hear me out for a second here, right? Mark Andrews in week 3, 35% of the routes, not terrible, or not good. That is terrible, is what I should say. 7% of the targets. So he only ends up going out there in this game, and if we show his total box score, look all the way down here. You look at all these guys who were involved in week 3 for the Ravens, all the way down here, Mark Andrews, 0 catches on 1 target. In this game, he played 33% of the snaps and only ran 6 routes. Terrible. And now through 3 games, you can see right here, Mark Andrews has run 75% of the routes for the Ravens. That's just 15th amongst tight ends. We need this number to be closer to 85% for him to pay off a 4th round price. But if you scroll over a little bit, some encouraging signs. Leads all tight ends in slot snaps. That's good to see. But the problem is just 8 targets through 3 games. The dude has like 60 receiving yards right now, 65 receiving yards, 27th amongst tight ends in targets. His target share is just 9%, 31st. This isn't going to pay off that price point. And overall, it's been really bad. I actually found this stat on PFF, a blocking stat that's concerning. In 2022, Andrews pass blocked on 1 snap. In 2023, he pass blocked on 7 snaps. And in 2024, he's already through 3 games pass blocked on 7 snaps. Now, that might not sound like a lot to you, but over the course of a year, that's 40 or 50 pass blocking snaps and him losing 8, 10, 12 targets, and that adds up for fantasy. Now, that's all the bad stuff, right? But we do have to add some context here. In week 3, the Baltimore Ravens were up on the Cowboys by 3 to 4 scores in that game. Lamar Jackson only threw 15 times. They were running all down the Cowboys' terrible, dead last ranked run defense. Derrick Henry was having himself a game, so they didn't have to throw the ball a lot. It wasn't really needed for Mark Andrews to go out there and run routes. He ran 6 routes on 15 pass attempts, so again, that's not great. You would like him to run more routes, but it's not the end of the world. And I think a lot of people forget. I think they think it's just like a video game, like week 1 of the season starts and all the players are completely healthy and there's no concerns. They're out there. That means they're healthy. Even though literally a month before the season in August, Mark Andrews was involved in a car accident that actually kept him out of training camp and practice. The dude was not practicing until 3 days before the season started. He attended walkthroughs on Monday. Tuesday was his first practice, and Thursday he played in week 1 against the Chiefs. And let's also keep in mind that 2 weeks before the season, the Ravens ended up losing their offensive line coach. He passed away very tragically, very sadly, I should say. He passed away. So that's 2 weeks before the season. You now have your offensive line coach who's been there for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Now you have to replace him, and the offensive line needs some help, and they don't have it. And I bring that up to say that's maybe why Mark Andrews is pass blocking an extra couple snaps a game, just to give them that help until they get their legs under them and they know exactly what they should be doing as the year goes on and they get a little bit of cohesiveness on the unit. So that's just me trying to add some of the context, because all you're seeing right now is Mark Andrews is so bad. We're in an overreaction space. Everybody wants to overreact. It's just been 3 weeks, but Mark Andrews literally just turned 29 years old in September. He's still not over the hill. Everybody's saying he's an older tight end now. Travis Kelce's an older tight end. Travis Kelce at 34, Zach Ertz at 35 or 36 years old. They're older older tight ends. A 29-year-old tight end is not an older tight end compared to a 23-year-old, sure, but he's not like over the hill. His career is over all of a sudden. And I just want to balance it all out, because if you go on Twitter, Mark Andrews is terrible, his career is over. It's literally recency bias. Like, if he has a big game next week, we forget about all that. And don't get me wrong, it'll be a tough matchup on Sunday Night Football against the Bills. They'll be at home, which is nice, but then after that, great matchups. You get a matchup against the Bengals, the Commanders, and even the Bucks. I mean, this is a great schedule. So yeah, maybe this week in week 4 against the Bills, he doesn't get there because it's a tough matchup in general. But after that, the schedule is as good as it gets against the Bengals and the Commanders. So I actually think Mark Andrews' value couldn't be any lower right now. I just traded for him in the Flock Fantasy League. We're doing a reality fantasy TV show. You should check it out. I think it's a lot of fun right now over on Flock Fantasy League's YouTube channel. But I just traded like basically Courtland Sutton for him. Courtland Sutton, who's like my wide receiver 5 or 6 for Mark Andrews, who I don't believe is just going to be this bad the rest of the season. Like I said, I ended up just getting Mark Andrews by trading away Courtland Sutton. Andrews right now is my 90th ranked overall player the rest of the season. Courtland Sutton's like not even in my top 100. He's like 105 or somewhere, so I ended up getting value based on my rankings, you can see right here. But I think you can probably go out there and trade Dallas Goedert right now 1-for-1 for Mark Andrews after Dallas Goedert's big game. I do that in a heartbeat. I think you could probably go out there after DeAndre Hopkins' solid week and trade him 1-for-1 for Mark Andrews. I do that in a heartbeat. And I know what you're saying. Andrews has been so gross. It's so terrible. It's been 3-game sample size we're looking at here. Do you think Brandon Aiyuk, like we talked about earlier, is going to be this bad moving forward? No. Next up, I want to talk about Rashid Shaheed, another player that I just acquired in the Flock Fantasy League as well. This is a guy who was having a great start to the season, and then in week 3, what does he do? Very similar to Mark Andrews. You scroll all the way down here on the Saints receiving game against the Eagles in week 3, 0 catches for Rashid Shaheed. The positive, though, is he had 5 targets in this game. And on those 5 targets, definitely 1, and you can probably argue 2 drop touchdowns in this game. So just like not a quality performance from Shaheed, but that's not something that's sticky moving forward. Because this is still a guy who had a great week 1, a great week 2. The Saints offense overall looks really nice right now. And through 3 games, Shaheed is tied with Chris Olave for a 25% target share on this team. But more importantly, if we scroll over to his air yards, how often he's being used downfield, the cheat codes, he's seeing 48% of the team's air yards, 18% more than Chris Olave. This is going to lead to those big touchdown plays or just big plays in general, like we saw in week 1 and week 2 where Shaheed had these 40+ yard touchdowns. And quietly right now, Shaheed leads the NFL amongst all pass catchers in yards per route run and is second in yards per reception. And a lot of it is simple. He's just a starting wide receiver now. Last year and the year before that, maybe you're lucky if he sees 30 to 40% of the snaps. This year, 70% of the snaps. He's a starting wide receiver. He's out there by far the majority of the time, and it's leading to a lot of bigger plays. And I think that's going to continue in this upcoming game this week, where he goes and takes on the Falcons on the road. Falcons have a quality secondary, have a decent defensive back, maybe 2, but for the most part, it's not like a shutdown matchup. It's a fine matchup where Shaheed had great success in fine matchups the first 1 or 2 weeks of the season. Right now, Rashid Shaheed is my number 75 overall player. In the Flock Fantasy League, I traded Jerome Ford 1-for-1 for him, and if you could see, I'll scroll down to Jerome Ford, my number 92 overall player, so I think I got a good deal there. But any of these guys, I would trade Rachaad White before Bucky Irving takes over that backfield right now for Rashid Shaheed. I would trade Brian Robinson if you could for Rashid Shaheed. Devin Singletary is a great option to trade away across a different position for Rashid Shaheed. So that's one wide receiver on an exciting offense. This next guy is on an even more exciting offense in my opinion, and that's Khalil Shakir, who right now looks like the Bills' number 1 receiver through the last 2 games, and that's important because he's attached to Josh Allen. If he's been the most productive receiver on this team in back-to-back games, yeah, maybe we should start definitely adding him in fantasy where he's available in like 30% of leagues, but trading for him as well. Because he's coming off of a week 3 performance against the Jaguars where he caught all 6 of his targets for 72 yards and a touchdown. He goes for over 19 fantasy points, and he did this in just 3 quarters of play because then all the starters were pulled. And if you watch the games and if you watch the film, maybe you have access to NFL Pro so you can watch all of his routes or all of his targets. The dude just moves different. He just moves different. He's dynamic, explosive, especially with the ball in his hands. And that's exactly why so far this season he ranks 12th in yards per route run. He's been efficient not only at the catch point but after the catch as well. 12th in yards per route run. He's right now 10th overall in yards per target, so his targets are a little bit more downfield like they were last season than people are expecting. This is a guy that overall was the number 1 wide receiver when a quarterback passer rated or targeted him passer rating wise last year in the entire NFL. So throwing the ball last year to Khalil Shakir, if we're talking expected points added, was the number 1 play you can make in the passing attack. That is a stat courtesy from my friend over at Yahoo, Andy Behrens. We've done some shows together. He brought that up on one of the shows and it kind of stuck with me. Now don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that Khalil Shakir is like a top 50 player the rest of the season. I'll show you where he ranks very soon, but if he's going to be the guy that starts to stand out in a receiver core that has Mac Hollins, a glorified tight end on the outside, Keon Coleman, who I'm excited about but seems like he lost a lot of usage this past week to MVS, Curtis Samuel, a veteran that seems like he's still working his way back from a toe injury. I mean, there's a lot of upside here overall because he's, again, potentially the number 1 receiver. That's what he's been the last 2 weeks for a Josh Allen-led offense. offense. And so far through 3 games this year, Shakir has a 24% target share, which is more than 2 times as much as any other Bills receiver. And like I said earlier, he's not a top 50 player for me. He's my 121st overall player right now, which means you could probably acquire him pretty easily. I would trade Isaiah Likely for him if you could. I would trade any of these guys. Quentin Johnston for sure is the perfect guy to trade off of a couple of touchdown games for Rashid Shaheed right now. And I'm going to sound like a broken record on this next guy because it's his 3rd straight week in this video, but continue to buy one Tank Dell real quick. I want to keep buying low on him because he finally produced this past week. He goes out there and he has a serviceable flex week for you. 5 catches, 62 yards, 11.2 fantasy points. He was actually usable for you in fantasy football, which is a nice trend compared to the last 2 weeks. And if we look at the upcoming schedule, or if we look at his schedule in general, like yes, the matchup against the Colts to start the year was good. There was a touchdown, 50-yard touchdown, barely broken up. He would have had a big day. Matchup against the Bears, tough matchup. That's a top 5 overall defense, and he dropped a 50-plus yard catch, maybe touchdown in that game. And then this past week against the Vikings, another top 5 defense that they faced. So it's been some brutal stretches these last couple of games for Tank Dell and the overall offense, but now he's going to get a nice matchup against the Jaguars, who we were just talking about the Bills. The Jaguars just allowed over 300 total yards of offense and 4 touchdowns to Josh Allen in that passing attack in literally just 3 quarters of play. Tank Dell for me is my 56th overall player. He's a top 30 wide receiver for me the rest of the season. I would be trading wide receivers, in my opinion, like George Pickens for him, like Michael Pittman for him, and I think you can get these deals done, like Amari Cooper for him, which sounds crazy, but I would personally be doing that right now. And the perfect one, in my opinion, is Xavier Worthy. Go trade Xavier Worthy off of his 20 points in week 1, his 2 touchdowns, because I'm concerned about Xavier Worthy's role. We'll talk more about that in a future video this week. Xavier Worthy for Tank Dell, get Tank Dell immediately. So these have been 7 wide receivers that you should trade for, not now, but right now. But if you want to see the running back version of this video, and there's a couple of good ones in there that I think you can acquire pretty cheap, well, check out this video right here. You can click that video. YouTube thinks you'll like it. I think you'll like it. I think it could be. I'm not going to say it is. Could be your favorite video of all time. So be sure to check it out. And I'll see you all, beautiful people, in the next one.